When you think of great college football teams, like the all-time greats, or maybe I shouldn't even say all-time greats. Let's just say the teams that compete for conference titles and national championships every year. Let's be honest, in the new world of college football, that's all we really care about, right? Well, we care about beating our rivals. We care about highlight plays. This is all entertainment at the end of the day, and also rivalries should and it will and should always matter in college football. I'd argue that rivalries, deep, long-lasting, historic rivalries are really what makes college football the sport that it is. But bear with me a moment. When we really think of competitive teams, what's the first thing, or I guess I should say, what's the first few things that come to mind? Or maybe my question to you guys should be, what, in your opinion, are the characteristics of a great team, or a team that should aim to compete, at the very least, for its conference, if not a national title? Now, I paused for a second there because I wanted to give you a second to think about it. And the lists on this may vary, right? If you're more of an offensive-minded person or a high-scoring-minded person, you might think of wide receivers, quarterback, offensive line. Maybe you like having a great tight end first. If you're more of a defensive-minded person, say, you're an Iowa fan or something like that, you may think of, guys like Jay Higgins, Jack Campbell, and some of the great linebackers and defensive players you've had over the past few years, and think about how important defense is. Or you may think of how everyone overlooks special teams even when it comes to playing close games and winning championships. Though I'd argue 99% of college football fans, when you ask them that question, they're going to say something along the lines of good to great quarterback play, having great coaching, having a great offensive line, having a great defense, etc., all matters. I bring that up because I think there's a few teams in the sport this season we can look at and say, if we make that list, they kind of check every box, right? Georgia with returning starting quarterback, the defense always being good there, the run game looking good, solid there this season, offensive line, etc. Texas looks decently good this season, pretty damn good as a matter of fact. Ohio State, as much as we hate to admit it as Michigan fans, looks like they're there again this season. Indiana, Oregon, all those teams you can say, great quarterback play, good to great offensive line, good wide receivers, good running backs, and a good defense, good defensive line, good corners, etc., and great coaches, right? Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning, Kurt Cignetti. Those are the teams you think about. What if I told you that if we really look at Michigan's roster, and we really look at especially the coaching staff that this program brought in, and especially what if I told you if we kind of project into the future and make a few assumptions? I'm not going to lie, this is kind of an assumptive thought experiment we're going to run here for a minute, but just bear with me again for a moment. We're kind of projecting into the future and assuming a few things, but I think there's some logic, some rationale behind it that we'll get into in this video. What if I told you Michigan in some ways checks some of those boxes? And I know it may sound crazy to say because there's a lot of people out there, a lot of experts, a lot of quote-unquote experts, a lot of armchair quarterbacks, a lot of other fellow YouTubers and content creators or their online personalities predicting that this team will go 8-4, dare I even say 7-5 this season, with the tough schedule that they do have. But just purely looking at the roster, purely looking at the talent they have, I don't think you can deny the fact that now that Kyle Wittingham and staff are in the fold, this team has a ton of potential, which we're going to get into in this video. We're going to list 5 reasons why Michigan football will improve in 2026 and may even drastically improve to the point where Yes, even with a very tough schedule, even with a gauntlet of a schedule where they have to play 3 national title contenders, not to mention also have to play teams like Oklahoma and Iowa and an upstart Minnesota team. Even with all that, this team, if it reaches its full potential, may be looking at the college football playoff, and who knows, depending on who you draw in the first, second, third, etc. rounds of the college football playoff, might even win a game or two. That's what we want to get into in this video. But before we really get into it, don't forget to give this video a like, help get it up into that almighty algorithm, subscribe, help us get to 1,000 subscribers, which is our first goal for this channel. DTB is back and as good as ever, baby. We're doing it again. We're doing it all over again here, starting from scratch, and we'd really appreciate your support. But let's get into reason number 1 why Michigan will improve, and I dare even say vastly improve in 2026 right here. And let's just get over to Jason Beck, the new offensive coordinator for this team. As many people may not even know yet, Jason Beck has coached for 12 years as both a quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator at the FBS level. He's coached at places like BYU, Virginia, Syracuse, New Mexico, and Utah before coming here to Michigan. Interestingly enough, I looked it up. His offense last year at Utah was 19th in yards per play, 8th in adjusted EPA per play, 12th in success rate, and 4th in yards per rush. Had an elite rushing offense with a running quarterback in Devin Dampier, and those stats are all according to GameOnPaper.com. This man brings experience, toughness, and a scheme that I think really honestly fits the personnel at Michigan, maybe even better than schemes that this team's previously run, dare I say it, even back into the championship seasons of the Harbaugh era. And I know that may sound crazy to say, but even when you look back to like 2023, 2022, 2021, those runs, there was a pro-style offense being run, and in some regards, you had some players in that offense. J.J. McCarthy could have run a lot more than what they ran him, and they didn't. Donovan Edwards was a running back that you could have done a lot more with in a lot of ways. I think they did kind of, do him wrong by asking him to gain a bunch of weight and become more of a traditional running back when he really the whole time should have been used in different ways, but I digress. Jason Beck brings the much needed experience, and he also brings a scheme that really fits the personnel of this team. I really think this fits like a glove, to use a cliche. You have a run-first quarterback in Bryce Underwood. You have an offensive line that's athletic and powerful, with guys along that offensive line that are good pullers. And it's an offense that I really like because one of my main complaints with Chip Lindsey last season, and I didn't see it coming in the offseason last year because I had done some film reviews, I had watched some tape on Chip Lindsey's offenses. I don't know why he didn't do it last season, because it was a thing he'd done in previous stops, when he was at North Carolina and such. They didn't really run a lot of, pre-snap motion. They didn't do a lot of misdirection. They didn't run many counter plays, or at least get the defense kind of, on their heels a little bit. Offensive coordinators often say one of the keys to offensive success is keeping the defense from really digging their toes into the ground and coming at you because they know what's coming. Chip Lindsey didn't do a lot of that if you go back and watch the film, and I don't quite know why. Maybe that's part of, what Sherron Moore, maybe he wasn't just holding back the team from running the quarterback out of fear of injury. Maybe he was holding back the offense in some ways from fear of mistakes being made. I don't honestly know. The man was one of the most conservative college coaches I'd ever seen, and that probably played a lot into the lack of offensive success. But again, I digress. Jason Beck's offense, from what I've seen, and I have watched some of the games that Utah played last season, he's going to motion you. He's going to try his best to out-scheme you. He's going to get guys moving, and he's going to get defenses second-guessing. And guess what? We haven't even got into the biggest point, the one that I think a lot of people are talking about out there, because it is a good point to be made. Yes, it is low-hanging fruit for us content creators, but it's true. they're going to run Bryce Underwood. And Bryce Underwood, at this stage in his career, from what we've seen, he doesn't really have it all there in figuring out the passing game at the college level. Has a great arm, has great arm talent, but really needs to learn when to throw into certain windows and when not to, how to read college defenses better, and just how to get a better feel for the college game as a passer. Well, in the meantime, what do you do with a guy like Bryce Underwood, who's 6'5" and can run a 4.4 40? You run him. You don't hold him back from doing the thing he's best at right now. And Jason Beck, unlike the previous coaching regime, is not dumb enough to make that mistake. I think this offense will be better. It's a better scheme. I like it better for the talent that they have. And speaking of the talent that they have, number 2 on this list as to why Michigan football will improve in 2026 is Bryce Underwood. Probably the most polarizing quarterback in all of college football. And right now you hear rumor after report after report on Bryce Underwood, people on Utah message boards, people hosting Ohio State YouTube channels, people all over the internet, not even rival fans. You know, rival fans are going to say rival fan things. Don't get me wrong. We shouldn't be surprised by that. After the spring game performance, which I will admit was lackluster, after things that were stated by guys like Eric Weddle and others who have been to practices, Bryce Underwood's under a lot of heat right now. And it sounds like, you know, from the spring game and from certain practices that people have attended, you know, he's making mistakes. I think it's important, though, to step back and realize that 18-year-olds, because he is still 18 years old, hasn't even turned 19 years old yet. There's kids his age that are still playing their high school ball. You know, he could still be in high school, came, of course, a year early somehow. I don't know exactly how that stuff works. I'm not involved. I don't work in the public school system, nor do I work in college recruiting, so I wouldn't know. But I believe he came a year early somehow. Just must have got all of his reports in. I'm sure that was the case. I speak in jest for anyone who can't pick up my sarcasm there. But Bryce Underwood, I think, with having a full summer of working with Jordan Palmer, one of the better quarterback coaches out there, also having a dedicated quarterback coach on staff in Coy Detmer, also having an offensive coordinator in Jason Beck, who we just talked about, who spent years as a quarterback's coach himself, who runs a quarterback-centric offense. I think Bryce Underwood is going to improve, and I think what you're seeing and hearing about right now are growing pains. I think because he's relatively young. But even if, let's go back to last season, and let's say that Michigan ran Bryce Underwood from the start. We all know what he was capable of when he did run, because we saw it. We saw it in games like the game against Nebraska. We saw it a bit in the Ohio State game when they finally opened it up. He did get some good runs in that game, 5, 10, 15-yard carries. We saw it at times when he scrambled against teams like Northwestern, and earlier in the season against New Mexico. We saw flashes of it. Imagine if they didn't hold him back, and he did have more carries, and he did have more yards, and he was able to keep a 5, 6, 7 yards per carry average as a runner. Even with the lackluster passing stats, we'd all be sitting here saying, hey, he's a good quarterback. Runs the ball well, gains yards, plays on an efficient offense. I think we're going to see that and a little bit more from Bryce Underwood this season. And by the way, if you're questioning this, I do have some points on the spring game I want to bring up kind of in defense of Bryce Underwood, by the way, but I'm deciding in real time now as I record this that I'm going to save that for a future video. Because I've gone back and I've watched the film of the spring game. I will say this, guys, it wasn't all Bryce's fault that he had that lackluster performance. And it wasn't just on the offensive line either. There were other things going that day, is what I will say. Bryce Underwood's the type of quarterback, and I've said this in previous videos, that, like Vince Young, like Cam Newton, like all the other types of quarterbacks he's been compared to, he kind of fits that mold. He's that kind of archetype, right? If we're playing like NBA 2K or Madden, we're picking archetypes. He's the scrambler archetype at this point in his career, right? He's a type of quarterback that needs to get up to speed on the college game. And in the meantime, as he's doing that, what do? You use his greatest strength, and that's what this offense will do. When you use his greatest strength, by the way, if you know anything about the game of football, which I'm assuming you do, you came here because you're informed and you're looking for great college football content, and I hope that I'm delivering that for you, by the way. Like, share, and subscribe. When you run the quarterback, especially when he scrambles a lot, that puts the defenses in conflict. And when defenses are in conflict in that way, that specific way, they're no longer able to play man coverage. And we actually saw it a good bit last season. Bryce was primarily a pocket passer right out of the gate. He was able to have success in his first couple of games, and you saw it in the Brooks Austin film review. If you watched that one, I did. Brooks Austin was heralding Bryce as the next great thing because, well, they played really well in that game. But defenses caught on to the fact that he wasn't running the football. They played more tight man coverage, and he had more difficulty getting the ball to his receivers, and he was also under pressure. If Bryce scrambles more, defenses aren't going to be able to play that man coverage anymore because you don't want to turn your backs on a guy like Bryce running down the football field. That means you got to play more zone. You can either play man or you can play zone. There really are no other options. You can play some hybrid coverages, and maybe some college teams are, but that's more for the NFL. If you watch the film, by the way, against teams that primarily played zone, like New Mexico, Central Michigan, Wisconsin, they all played majority zone coverage, and Bryce had some of his best games. I think he went like 19 or 20 of 28 against Wisconsin for like 270 yards, a touchdown, and no interceptions. Could be a game changer. And he's just got way too much potential, by the way, to be upseated by a freshman in Tommy Carr. I honestly don't even know why I'm really addressing that in this video, because I frankly think it's a little crazy. I do. He's not going to lose a spot to Tommy Carr. Tommy Carr, if you saw him play in a real game under fire in a real setting in an actual college football game, I guarantee you he would make freshman mistakes. But I also, speaking of that, I'm going to save that for a future video because, again, I think there's reasons when it comes to offensive line play and play calling, both offensively and defensively, as to why he looked a bit better in the spring game and performed a little bit better than what Bryce had. Context is the key there. You need to understand the context of the plays being called, both offensively and defensively, the situations they were in, and what was really going on the field to understand why. If you just look at stat sheets, you're never going to get the full picture, and I think that's what a lot of people are doing when it comes to that one. But let's get to number 3. I think number 3, unlike Bryce Underwood, the quarterback with so many questions around him heading into the season, number 3 is a rather obvious one, and I'm not going to try to spend too much time on this one because, again, it is so obvious. But it's Jordan Marshall and Savion Hyder. And this is where I want you to think back to that list we made at the beginning of this video, right? We talked about, like, what is the checklist for a team that's able to compete for conference championships and national champions and historical runs, right? How many of you would put great running back rooms on that list? You think of guys like Derrick Henry, and I'm blanking on his name now. I just had it on the tip of my tongue. Adrian Peterson. There we go. I can remember some names. You think of great running backs from championship teams. You think of Blake Corum from the 2023 run that Michigan just had. There's a lot of teams through college football history that the key to their success was a great running back room. And I don't think I'm speaking anything novel or new or not previously understood by Michigan fans. We all know it. We all watched it. We all watch this program. Michigan does not win, important football games without a great run game. They're the epitome of a Midwestern, tough, northern, blue blood, blue collar college football team. And Jordan Marshall and Savion Hyder are just that. Jordan Marshall, arguably one of the best, if not the best running back in college football. Savion Hyder, one of the best, if not the best freshman running back to hit the college ranks in the last decade. I know I was listening to a podcast with Jake Butt actually just the other day, and Jake Butt compared him to Leonard Fournette, and I think that carries some weight. Jake Butt, former NFL player, former Michigan player, guy who's been to the practices and has seen him in person. That's the 5-star former number 1 running back in the country I'm talking about. I'm not even mentioning yet very much Jordan Marshall already being on roster, only being a redshirt sophomore, which is crazy to say. This kid's still got a ton of eligibility left if he stays for the duration of it, because I think, by the end of next year, he could very well be an NFL draft pick if things can go the way they've gone. Ran, by the way, for 1,000 yards, nearly 1,000 yards. It was like 943 or something like that, and over 6 yards per carry last year. Finished 3rd in the Big Ten with over 6 yards per carry. And it's easy to imagine how well they might do this season. This is where I want to lump in kind of my other part of this point, is the offensive line. It's hard to imagine him being much worse than he was last season, if not better, because the offensive line returns all of its starters from last season, and even could include some new stars who might, if he comes back from injury quickly enough, and it sounds like things are going well, might include guys like Andrew Babalola, a former top 10, was ranked 10th in his recruiting class overall, number 2 tackle in that class, former 5-star recruit out of Overland Park, Kansas, could compete for a starting job as well. The offensive line is going to be strong. I think it's going to be a solid B+ to A range in terms of, if I was to grade position groups. And then you've got these guys running behind them. And again, when we put together the full picture and we give the full context, Jason Beck at Utah with a pretty good offensive line, same offensive line coach, by the way, as who's going to be coaching this offensive line, and Devin Dampier, a running quarterback, and some decently good running backs, but not nearly as good as these guys, was able to put the 4th best rushing offense in the entire country together last season. Imagine what he can do with this talent. And speaking of talent, we're going to flip over to the defensive side for reason number 4. Think back again to my question at the beginning of this video. Some of you, when I asked that question, might have thought of 2021 Michigan, when the team that turned it all around, right? What did that team have? They had Aiden Hutchinson. They had David Ojabo. Look at teams in previous seasons that have either come close or won it all. They've had elite defenses with elite rush edges. Think of Georgia in 2021. Think of Georgia in 2022. Think of Indiana this past season with a pretty dominant defensive line led by guys like Michael Kamara. Oh, geez, I can't believe I did that. Kamara. That was his name. John Henry Daly could bring that elite level of both speed and physicality to a defensive line that's already pretty good. I really like the edge room, I should say. I have some reservations on the defensive tackle room, and that's actually where I disagree a bit, though I will admit this man probably knows more about football, has probably forgotten more about football than I'll ever know, so maybe I should just take his word for it. But Jake Butt on the podcast I listened to the other day did mention how much he loves the D tackle room. I'm actually a little hesitant to be that high in the defensive tackle room for this team, but I really love the edge room. I really like Lugard Adepayi, by the way, a guy who is really coming along, a guy who is kind of the picture-perfect ideal body type for a great defensive end, and I think when he really puts it all together in terms of skill, he'll be right there. I do like the edges. I do like Nate Marshall and some of the other guys on the roster, but John Henry Daly comes over from Utah and is probably immediately the best defensive end in a room that's full of great defensive ends, good to great defensive ends, I should say, already. And if you're wondering, if you don't know who he is and you haven't, or if you haven't been fully informed yet, Last season for Utah, he had 17 and a half tackles for loss and 11 and a half sacks. He's dominant. He's dominant, guys. Dominant. He's dominant. He has a physical presence. He does it all. He's big bodied yet possesses great speed. And there's a reason why I captured this picture for this slide. And I wanted to showcase the capability. You can see how big he is for a defensive end. He can set a really hard edge. And that's where he's really great too. He can play along that kind of 3-4 front and play the edge there, where you're more, kind of two gapping sometimes, but playing that more, defensive end anchor role. But he can also play the down end in a 4-2-5, like out in the 5 technique or whatever you want to call it, or the wide 9 even. He's got that size and that physicality. But this picture kind of encapsulates the fact that he can still dip that shoulder and use a good speed move too. He can speed rush, he can twist inside, he can set a hard edge on the run. He kind of does it all and does it all really well, and I really appreciate that about him. So again, when you think of like competitive, potentially championship teams, edge rusher is a pretty important position. That's another kind of box on the list that you would check here. And to get to my last point, and I think some of you are going to be a bit surprised by this one, but point number 5 is Jair Hill. And I think some people have forgotten, with the fact that Rod Moore's coming back, with Zeke Berry still being here, with some other guys transferring over from Utah who could be pretty good, and I expect to be pretty good, and all the excitement around the defensive end room as well. People forget. I don't think they necessarily forget, but I think they're kind of overlooking the fact that Jair Hill is back. It was a pretty good corner for this team last season. Granted, he got beat from time to time on the double moves. That was a problem for him, but if you go back and watch the film, he had kind of corrected for it and fixed those mistakes at the end of the season last season. Of course, I have pictured here the pick that he had against Jeremiah Smith in the Ohio State game. If only Michigan could have held on to that momentum they had at that point in the game. But, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, and definitely not college football. In fact, I don't know why I even said that there. That game wasn't even particularly close. It was close at this point, but I'm sure not many of you watching will want to rehash that entire game. Jair Hill did end the season, by the way, with 36 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1 sack actually came on a blitz, 1 interception, the one pictured, and 5 pass breakups last season. He had a pretty good PFF grade. He could have went in like the middle, I think anywhere from like the 3rd to 5th round ranges, maybe 2nd round in the NFL draft last season, but decided to come back and will play in a system that I think fits his style a little bit better, because I think he's the one guy on this team outside of the guys that have transferred over from Utah, obviously, and I'm blanking on names when it comes to them, so my apologies when it comes to that, but he's the one guy who was already here that I really trust in man coverage, and I know, excuse me, that Jay Hill, the new defensive coordinator at the University of Michigan, will be running some more man coverage. He's also great in cover 3. Cover 3, the corner, especially the CB1 is what Jair Hill will kind of carry the sideline and be responsible for the deep end of the deep third of the field. I think he's great in either of those defenses, and Jay Hill will be running a lot of either of those. So I think Jair Hill is a good system fit. He's also super athletic, super fast, was a 4-star, damn near 5-star coming out of high school. He was one of those guys that was like a 95.9 or a .959 or something like that coming out of high school on his 24/7 composite rating. Could have been a 5-star, maybe should have been a 5-star, because if he plays well this season, he'll go in the 1st or 2nd round of the NFL draft. He is that good, and he's long, as you see here pictured. He can jump up and get the ball. He has good ball skills. He defends the ball well. And I think, honestly, he probably fits into this defensive system that Jay Hill is bringing in better than the primary zone, doing all kinds of crazy things and moving people all over the place, Wink Martindale defense that we saw the last season or two. So Jair Hill is my 5th reason. And the reason for that, again, is when we think back to that kind of checklist of like, what does a team need to be hyper competitive at the college level? You need a lockdown corner. I mean, it's paramount in some ways, especially with the wide receiver talent that you see out there across college football. So those are my 5 reasons for why Michigan will improve in 2026. Like, again, subscribe, all that good stuff. Comment and let me know what you thought of this list. Let me know if there's anybody that you would have added, anybody you would have dropped out of this list. And join the Discord too. The link will be in the comments section. Look for it there and let us know what you think of this list. And do you think Michigan football has maybe a bit higher of a ceiling this season than some people may say? I'm yet to do my season prediction. I have an idea of where I think this team will finish, but that'll be in a future video. The schedule is incredibly difficult, but I think this team will improve. And I think people forget too, sometimes you can improve and be a better team and play in close competitive games, but not necessarily improve your record from year to year. Because let's admit, Michigan won 9 games last season, but what was their biggest win? Maybe Wisconsin or Nebraska. It was a bit of a lighter schedule than what they have this season. And in fact, I think if last year's team with that horrendous coaching staff and a first-year Bryce Underwood, if they had to play the schedule, this season's schedule, they'd probably go like 6-6. It's a gauntlet of a schedule. I don't know if they're going to finish 10-2 and potentially sneak into the college football playoff, but I will say this: if they fully play up to their potential, I could see them making it there. I could see them finishing 10-2. There's just a lot of things that got to go right for them, but that's going to be time. That's going to be in another video. I'll do my season prediction soon. Subscribe to the channel so you see that. And until next time, as always, be kind to other people out there.